it looked like somebody was bent over and had their head in the window of the deer blind, and it either heard me or smelt me, and he pulled his head out of the tent and stood straight up, and that shocked me. They don't make people that big.
The way it moved, almost as if it was gliding across the beach. I've never seen anything move like that in my life. They were screaming at each other in gibberish. It sounded like a language, and they were chuntering away back and forwards, back and forwards, back and forwards. I know what a bear looks like, and there is no way on this planet that what I saw were bears.
What are you reporting?
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sir?
Tia!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
This is Alicia from Kennesaw, Georgia, and you're listening to the best podcast on the planet, Sasquatch Chronicles.
Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Got a great show planned for you. I want to first kind of apologize about yesterday. The show for tonight was meant to go out yesterday, but I have this little dog named Teddy, for those that don't know, and he's been favoring one of his back legs for most of the week, really. And it's only really when he's laying down or when he's trying to get up that he would whine. Once he's on his feet, he's fine. But it was just getting worse and worse and worse all week long. And yesterday he was full blown like crying, just trying to get up, you know, like some wacky parent or something. I'm like freaking out. I'm calling different vets, and I finally got a hold of this emergency vet, which, you know, they're never cheap. And it was like an hour drive away, but he's my boy. He's my responsibility. And so I drove him to the vet, and I'm just stressing the whole time. And I could tell he was in pain most of the week, but it seemed like it was getting worse. And so when we went to the vet, you know, he did his full examination, and he was basically saying, you know, I think it's like you and I tearing a hamstring or something, a muscle. And there's nothing really wrong with the joints. There's nothing really, it's just, I think it's a torn muscle. And so he gave him painkillers and antibiotics. And he's doing much better today. But I was laughing because the vet's like, how do you think this might have happened? And Teddy's got this thing where I think he thinks he legitimately can fly, like Superman. And he does it in my house, and I let him get away with it because it's Teddy. But I have this coffee table, and the top of it is like fabric, like you would sit on it. It's the most useless thing on the planet. But he does this thing where he'll run like full sprint from the kitchen, jump on that, and launch himself in the air to land on the couch. And I don't know why he gets away with it. I guess it's because it's him. But he does this, and he'll do it in my backyard. Like, we'll be at one end of the deck, and I could see his eyes light up. And I'm like, Teddy, you can't fly. And he'll just take off and launch himself in the air, arms straight out, back legs straight out, like Superman. And I think every time he does it, he thinks he's going to fly. But then gravity kicks in and brings him back down to earth, and he can't fly. So anyway, I've been worried sick about him. I was up at 3 a.m. this morning giving him medicine and just kind of keeping an eye on him. But again, I apologized for yesterday. Tonight, we're going to be chatting with Drew. And Drew comes to us from South Carolina. he had this incident happen to him back in 2015. And he's part of this hunting club out there, and he had a full daytime sighting. So I asked him if he'd come on and kind of share it. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And if you get a chance, check out sasquatchchronicles.com. You can become a member and get additional shows. And again, for the members, I will return tomorrow night. Let's jump into it. I want to welcome Drew to the show. Drew, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, Wes.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you, how long have you been hunting on this property out there in South Carolina?
Well, this particular property, I was in the club for about 5 years. I got out for about 5 years and then been back in for 3 now. So about 8 years total on this property where I had the daylight sighting.
If you would, before you go into what happened to you, what was kind of your feelings about the whole subject of Bigfoot prior to any of this going on?
Well, not a whole lot. Kind of back to 1987, I was hunting with some family friends, and I had a encounter during the early morning hours on some different property down in a small town called Modoc, which is about maybe an hour's drive from where this property is, where I went in the woods, the hardwood bottom, and climbed up a tree stand. And before daylight, something on 2 legs walked up out of a bottom and got under my stand and was breathing heavy. It was just one of those things that just did not fit. No flashlight. I was like, no way somebody could walk through there, come up and come under my stand. Never seen it, but it was just out of place. And it turned and walked off after a little bit back in the general direction where it come from. So I had a feeling of, there's more to what we know about the woods in the South and across the country than what, we're accustomed to. I mean, when deer, what they sound like when they're walking, what small rodents or animals sound like, but just that kind of just put an uneasy feeling like, what's going on? What was that? And with the time going by, in the South, we'd sit around the table at night and talk to my grandmother and family and stuff. And I was sharing that with her one time, and she told me, she said, "Oh, you saw a booger." And I said, "What?" She said, "Yeah, a booger." She said, "I'll let the boogers get you." And she ended up being, living about 98 years old. And that stuck with me every time I was around her. I'd want to talk to her about it, didn't want to bring it back up or, be annoying to her. But that just in the back of my mind, and I started looking into the subject a little bit, but just, not knowing where it was going to go. Being a hunter, I said, I'll probably never see one. Being in South Carolina, didn't know if there were a lot of them here or not. You'd hear stories here and there, but a lot of people didn't talk about it. So anyway, leading up to that point, I had experiences with people out. We would be, hunting different areas of property. There was like almost 1 million acres, I think, of what the internet says in South Carolina. There's 1 million acres of game management or public hunting land. And so there's big plots that has 4,000 or 5,000 acres. And with different people, I would go out and hunt, and we would stumble across stuff way back in the woods that just was out of place. We run across one of these teepee looking structures. And like I said, I didn't see what built it. Wasn't there, but it was just out of place. Another strange event like that. Tracks on dirt roads where you would find footprints on the side of the road. And it's like, why would somebody be out here barefooted? And necessarily wouldn't always be that big, but it's just out of place. And with that kind of stuff leading up to this event, I just, had thought about it, but really wasn't deep into the subject. I'd heard about it, seen about it, and before cell phones come along, a lot of this stuff had already taken place, and internet and all that. So when that came about, of course, like anybody else, you would go and research that and anything, think about it or whatever. You'd go look it up and you'd see things. But that's kind of where I was at up to this point.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I've heard that from many hunters, where they'll be sitting in their tree stand. You know, hunters don't go in with lights or try and make noise, or a lot of times they're sitting in the dark quietly in their stand. And I've heard this behavior before where something will walk up on two legs, stand underneath the stand, and they can only hear the breathing. And the hunter's terrified. He didn't know what it is. I mean, it sounds like a man, but it's way too big to be a man. And it's fascinating. I've never been able to really figure out that behavior. Tell me, on this property, prior to leading up to your sighting, what were some weird things that happened out there?
Me and my son was down on one of the stands one evening, my oldest son, and he was still in high school, and we were back on a stand one evening and had a deer come out. He shot it. And I said, well, let me go back and cross this little creek and go over there and see if I can find it. I said, you just sit here and wait. And I got across the creek, and we heard noises up the creek that just were out of place. Like a high pitch, I wouldn't call it a whoop. It would be more like and it wasn't like a fox. It's really hard to put a hand around it. Just nothing I could recognize it and relate to any animal here. I was like, well, I need to hurry up and find this deer. It's getting dark. And I was able to find it and drag it across the creek. And as we were loading it up, he's like, Dad, you hear that? And then I stopped what I was doing because I was focused on getting the deer on the four-wheeler. And I started listening, and I was like, I don't recognize that sound. It was just a weird sound. You know, it's just one of those other things. Really can't put a word to it, but it, to the sound, but it was just out of place. He said he's heard wood knocks down there. So in that same area where me and him were hunting. So, but I didn't hear that when I was in there that night. But anyway, going back to the place exactly where I hunted, I, was going in there. It's probably about 2 years prior to my daylight sighting. So this would have been maybe the third year I was in the club before I got out the first time. I was walking in. I got off my four-wheeler. Where that dirt road comes in from the main club is probably about 3/4 mile drive on the four-wheeler to where I parked. And I would park just off the edge of the road, and I walk the trail down to my stand. And I got back in that morning. That morning I was hunting to the left of the creek, back, angled, going more southeast, from where I actually had the sighting. And as I was walking in, to my right, as quiet as it was that morning, I was going in with a low dim flashlight. I didn't want to really shine up anything. And I was walking, and I would hear walking. I heard something walking probably at about a 30 or 40 degree angle behind me. So I stopped, and then it took, a couple more steps. It stopped, and it was 2-leg walking. I started back walking. It would start back walking, and I still probably had another 75, 80 yards to go. And I said, okay, I'm going to stop this time, and I'm going to just stand still and see what happens. And I stopped, and it stopped. And I turned facing that direction. I said, I'm going to see this if I stand here and wait till daylight. It's either going to move off or I'm going to see it if it's visible. And I stood there until I could see, my hand in front of my face. I didn't see anything, never heard anything else. So I was like, well, I know I'm not hearing things, but what do you do? I'm not going to just stand here. I'm going to go and get up my stand and hunt. So, that was one of the strange things that happened. Another day I was in there, and down the hollow when I was in my box stand, which is on that same wash in there, it's a hardwood bottom. They only clear cut the pines up to the edge of the hardwood wash. They don't get the tractors and all fall down in there. It'd be too much work. And they leave that, it's just for the runoff. But down in that bottom, I had a box stand, and I was sitting in that box stand, and I heard, I guess you could call it like a bionic whistle, which there was nobody down that way. And then I heard whoops. And that's the first time I'd ever heard any vocalization out of anything that I've heard other people, play. You've played. That's the first time I'd ever heard anything like that. And that was back toward Park Creek or Little River, excuse me. And that little river, it's not, they call it Little River, but it's actually a big river that flows over into Clark's Hill. It's about an 80-mile run of river, which leads all the way back up to Due West, which is a small town between Abbeville and Anderson. And then Anderson, is at the foothills where runs up in the Appalachian Mountains. So, all the river chains, there's like 4 big lakes that run down through there, and all that area down through there is just, game management or wilderness. And so, that being one of those areas tied to that river, I was like, this is, prime habitat if I was to ever see something. Why, there's 2 strange events, something paralleling me, walking me, and then now I hear that. So after that, they, following next year, I think they started cutting timber right at the end of hunting season, and they had clear cutted the whole hillside that led back up to the road where I parked my 4-wheeler. In 2015, it was October. It was the middle of the week. I know that because I was by myself that morning when I went to the pegboard. We have what we call the pegboard. It's the lodge area, a little shack, and there's a few cabins people stay at every once in a while when they come down. But when I went to the pegboard that morning, I pegged in, so it would have been the middle of the week. And I'm pretty sure it was the second week of October, second week after gun season had opened, because I had killed a deer out of that stand the week before, and that always stuck in my mind. And so I was going to go back in that same area. I have a climbing stand on a hardwood tree where I could overlook the hillside. And when I got up in my stand that morning, about 10 o'clock, it was an overcast day. I'm looking due north. I had the wind out of the northeast. My 4-wheeler, I had parked where I always park it up there, and I could see it once I got up in my stand. And the short pines, because they had planted them back, were starting to come up, and they probably were about 4 foot tall at that point in time. And to my left, down that valley, there was the way those short pines get planted in rows, I could see the road that continues on past where I come in and park my 4-wheeler. It goes on down and kind of angles to a 45, then it straightens out. So as I'm sitting on this edge of this hardwood edge that drops off into a bottom, I'm watching this whole big clear cut. And like I said, at 10 or 10:30, I'm looking down that way. It was the same direction from where my other buck I had killed the week before had come from, just seeing if I could see anything. And I'm scanning that way, and I can only see about half of that road through that row of pines. And I see movement. I'm like, oh boy. So I picked up my rifle. I'm looking down through there, and Wes, what I saw blew my mind. I couldn't fathom. I had never seen anything move like that. And whatever it was down on all fours, but it was big from what I could see is its right shoulder, about half of its right shoulder and over. I couldn't see its head. I couldn't see its left side at all, but I could see it coming down that road, and it almost looked like you would say like spider crawling or walking. It just was out of place. And I was like, oh boy. when it gets down to where the road forks back uphill at a 45, I lost sight of it. I'm like, well, I didn't know if I'd ever see it again. And I had more questions than I had answers. And I'm like, what was that? So I'm watching. I didn't put my gun down by then, and it's probably a couple 100 yards to where it tops that hill. And I'm watching up there, and all of a sudden, this thing pops up. It don't stand up. It pops up. It's the weirdest move I ever saw, the way it stood up. And then I knew what I was looking at, because now I'm looking at something that I had seen pictures similar to. I don't know if you remember that movie, TV. It's actually a TV series that came on back in the 70s, Land of the Lost. There was a little monkey boy or something that was on that TV show.
Yeah, I think his name was Chaka.
Chaka, yeah. This thing was about 7.5 foot tall. It's way bigger than that little character on that TV thing, but it looked like that. When I first saw it, it had like cinnamon brown colored hair when it was coming down the road, and I was only seeing half of it because it was more shady. But when this thing popped up, it looked more like a, what I'd call brown sugar color. And I think it was because of how much light was hitting it. And maybe its underside was lighter. I don't know. But at this time, it looked a lot lighter in color. But it was 7.5 foot tall. It had a rounded head. It didn't have like a real conical or pointed head like some of those pictures I'd seen of Patty and other things. This thing had a rounded head, and it had patches of hair on its face. But it was looking in the direction of my four-wheeler. I think it could, and I think the look on its face when it saw my four-wheeler was what the reason it got up and was like, that's not supposed to be here. And when it's looking at my four-wheeler and it had that expression on its face, my brain was trying to comprehend what I was seeing. Didn't ever expect this. They always show up when you don't expect it. I'm sitting there deer hunting, and now I'm looking at something that not even supposed to exist. But, I had a feeling that, they did from what my grandmother told me and what had happened back in 87, 88, walking under my stand. It kind of went full circle there. My brain's thinking, okay, what am I seeing here? Now I know what I'm seeing, and it was just hard to put into words, and feelings, what was standing there. And then at that point, I'm like, what's this thing going to do next? That's the next thought that went in my brain. And, I don't know how long it stood there. It wasn't very long, things like that. It seems like it slows down. I mean, I replay it in my mind every day. I still see that walk as it's coming down the road, even though I could only see its right side. That movement it was making was just so odd that it just replays in my mind. And the same with when it stood up. I've never seen anything stand up like that, and especially to being that tall. And then seeing the expression on its face as it's looking at my four-wheeler. And like I said, I looked there for a few seconds or however long it was. And then instead of turning its head, which I think they may be able to do, or turn their eyes, its whole upper section, it didn't move its legs. It just kind of turned its shoulders, and now it's looking in my general direction. And I'm like, okay, I wonder what it's picked up on or why it's doing that. I don't know how it could have smelt me. Maybe it just was checking out the area because that four-wheeler was there and it was seeing what else was there. But, when it turned its shoulders and looked my direction, I'm like, in my brain, I'm going, okay, is it going to come this way? What's it going to do? Had no idea. I heard a couple of your shows I've been listening to, and it was talking about, somebody's four-wheeler got tore up. And then I talk to people at work, and they said, well, and I tell people about my story. People that trust me with my line of work, they know I'm not going to just talk and say something that's not true with my reputation. about line of business, and they're like, well, why didn't you shoot it? And I'm like, that's the last thing that was on my mind. I said, I had a phone in my pocket, a gun in my hand. I said, but I'd never seen one of these things before. And I'm looking at something that I really, back when I was a young boy, my dad always told me, he says, look, if you ain't going to eat it or if it ain't going to harm you, he said, you best not shoot it. And I took that as good advice. So I didn't want to draw attention to myself. And they said, well, you should have hollered at it. I said, no. I said, a hunter is always, like you said earlier, you want the element of surprise. You want to be, the quieter you are, the better you are. And that's the same thing I was feeling that time it walked up underneath me. I had no inclination of grabbing a flashlight and turning it on and shining it down there. I didn't know whatever it was below me. I didn't want to know it was up there, even though it might have knew I was there. And that's the same feeling I had about when I was looking at this thing. I was trying to study it and figure out as much about it because you don't know how long that it's going to last. You don't know what it's going to do next. And then immediately in that moment of time, my brain thinking that this thing turns and is like, I don't want no part of this. I'm moving away. And it walks straight away from me over the road. And it's probably maybe 25, 30 feet to the next row of pines, but those were a little bit taller and it moved right between them and went on. So, that was the end of that sighting, but it changed my life forever, Wes. I look at a lot of things differently. When I go out in the woods, I feel that I'm not always on edge, but I'm just more cautious. That's a good way of putting it. There was times back when I was young, I didn't even own a pistol. I'd have a Bowie knife on my pocket or a knife in my pocket, and I'd just head out. But I don't feel the same way anymore.
The majority of hunters are really safe with guns, and they're not going to shoot something just to shoot it. It's kind of like that mentality you were just talking about, where if I'm not going to eat it, I'm not going to shoot it. Obviously, unless they're in danger, the hunter's absolutely going to shoot it. But I think when it comes to Sasquatch and putting one down, I really think a hunter is going to be the last person to do it. When you were looking at this thing, would you describe it? And did you put your scope back up when it came back out?
Yeah, when it popped up, like I said, I was looking with my naked eye. When it popped up, I didn't add that in there, but when it stood up, that's when I raised my rifle and I was checking it out. And that's when I realized it looked like that character in that TV series came to my mind. It didn't look, what I thought, by seeing a picture of Patty in the face. It didn't look like that. It wasn't as broad or heavy set as the picture of Patty. It was more slender, but yes, it was still muscular, but it was tall and kind of almost is the width of its shoulders, of course, were wider than, but when it dropped down into its legs, and it had a long torso. Its head set right on its shoulders, but like I said, it was a rounded head, and then its legs, were shorter than the torso, which was odd. I mean, it's just the way the thing was built. But the face, like I said, it had patches of hair. The eyes seemed to be sunk back in a little bit and kind of a heavier brow ridge. His forehead might have sloped back some, but the skin was kind of an ash color. It just blew my mind. What do you do? You just can't hardly comprehend seeing something like this and trying to, my brain recorded it, of course. Like I said, there's not a day goes by because I listen to the podcast. I watch TV shows. My wife's like, hey, there's some special coming on. And immediately when I start watching it, that whole sighting plays back through my mind again. And, but like I said, with its face, I really couldn't tell the color. I just know they were dark. With that scope I have 3x9 50 millimeter scopes. So that being, 100 or so yards from where I parked the four wheeler to where I climbed up the tree to overwatch these hillsides, and it kind of widens up to my left. But, that's basically all I could tell. I couldn't see any ears, so they must have been smaller. I mean, like I said, the hair the way, if you ever look that creature up on that TV series, the hair was longer coming off the top of the head. It had more of the forehead showing, just like in that creature on that show, but the hair on the side of his head kind of hung down like almost like a guy with I don't say a mullet or whatever, but mullets when it's in the back, but it's all the way around the sides over its ears. And that's kind of all the details I had in looking at its face. I was checking it out the best I could in the time I had, but I survived because its nose was, flattened. It wasn't like a human nose, even though it had, when it was on the ground, I didn't see its head. I wished I could have, because then I could describe what it looked like more animal-like. Is when it was crawling, that was more animal-like. But when it stood up, it looked more human-like, I guess you'd say, minus the fact that it was covered with hair and, just the different facial features. It almost looked like it was, in a sense, you would think when you're talking about a creature like that, like it was maybe interbred a little bit. It doesn't look, compared to the patty as being the standard, this thing looked a little bit different.
I've heard that Chaka character referenced many times by eyewitnesses. Would you say what you were looking at was more human-like?
I would say about 50-50. Like I said, it had human features, just kind of like an orangutan or a monkey or whatever. They have, eyes, ears, mouth, teeth like ours, nose. But then, they more resemble a monkey, but then, or a gorilla resembles a gorilla. But then you mix in that human factor of a human face mixed into that. You could even go to say as far as a little bit of a Native American look mixed in there. I know I've seen on totem poles and masks that they've carved a Bigfoot. They had to be spot on because, it really had that oval facial look that a lot of those Native American carvings look like. They knew what it looked like in the face when they carved that. I really believe they saw the same thing that I saw or similar to.
And when you said it looked at your four-wheeler almost like, oh, that doesn't belong here, what was that expression like that gave you that impression?
It was like shocked and at the same time kind of confused, like that shouldn't be there. And I don't know what it was doing. I don't know if it was traveling up that road, when it down on all fours and not seeing its head. I couldn't tell if it was sniffing the ground. I could only speculate what it was up to. But when it got to the top of the hill and obviously it had to see my four-wheeler, was the only reason it would have popped up, I assume. But with that look on its face, it like that shouldn't be there. And it was more of a kind of almost like a frown, like it was disappointed, but at the same time, it was like frustrated. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. And so kind of the expression you're describing almost sounds more human than it does really animal.
Yes. In that aspect. Yeah. Cause if you look at most animals, they look the same, whether they're mad or, the only difference between mad is their mouth's open and they're growling, or their mouth's closed and you say, oh, well, it's okay. I guess everything's okay. With this thing, you could tell it had emotion. It showed emotion to itself and to its expressions. And like I said, that's, my mind at that point in time when I was looking at it, and then it finally turned its shoulders toward my direction and general direction. That look was like, what's it going to do next? That was the biggest question at that point. I said, is it going to come toward me? Is it going to make any sound? Is it going to go toward my four-wheeler? I had no idea. But that expression was like either, a frustration, it interrupted what he was doing, or whatever he was doing, and he didn't like it. And then it was kind of like at the same time, maybe I shouldn't be here, or I'm the one that shouldn't be here, but I'm not going to confront this because I don't know what's going on down there, who's there, why that's there. I'm just going to get out of the area.
After it looked at the four-wheeler and kind of turned in your general direction, do you think it knew you were there?
I think it was just trying to scan what else might be in the area. I don't think the sun was shining enough to pick up a glare off my scope. Because like I said, at that point, I was looking through my scope so I could get a good close-up view. There was no doubt what I was looking at was flesh and blood. And and only when, like I said, when people ask me why didn't I shoot it, I was like, well, it wasn't threatening me. It wasn't tearing up a four-wheeler. I had no reason to kill it. I wasn't going to eat it. What would I do with it if I killed it at that point in time? I mean, all those quick questions go through your brain. Of course, 100 times since then, I'm going, well, you saw one and you had your chance and you muffed. You could have been famous, but that's not always, the telltale. Would it mess up? Like I said, I'm a hunter first. I don't go to the woods just to see Bigfoot. It was a fortunate thing that happened, I guess you could say. It's changed my whole thoughts on a lot of things about the woods, but I love to hunt so much, and being an avid hunter, I ain't going to let it change how I feel about the woods. Because people ask me and say, well, if you saw one of those things, ain't you scared? I'm like, well, we should be scared to get on the highway every day. I mean, you can, it's just one of those things where, you never run, when somebody's drunk driver is going to hit you head on. I said, I go the same way to the woods. I don't know when something might happen, but I'm not going to let that incident and that experience change how I feel about the woods. That's just me,
Yeah, I generally try and tell people, especially hunters, not to shoot them. Obviously, if they're threatening you, send lead down range. Or even if it was tearing apart my four-wheeler, I would have shot it. But, and I've said this many times on the show, I don't believe that they run around by themselves. I think if you see one, there's probably two or three nearby. And they tend to have a revenge streak. And so I tend to tell hunters not to shoot them. If you want to become famous or infamous and shoot a Sasquatch, I'm all for it. I don't have a lot of love for these things, so I'm not saying it for Sasquatch's sake, mainly for the hunter's safety. But it is interesting too about the spider crawl. I remember when me and my brother reported that, and we were laughed at. I remember all these big time Bigfoot researchers said, "Oh, they don't move. They don't do that. They don't move like that." And it's like, well, I don't know what to tell you. That's what that's what we saw.
That's so strange, Wes, because I didn't even know they did that. When, like I said, when I had that one walk up under my stand, and I did a little research after that between that sighting or the sighting I had in 2015 and then having that experience, because I can only speculate what that was. But like I said, the strange things that I've run across out in the woods that just out of place up to that point where I see this thing, it's just one of those scenarios where I didn't know all, and nobody would probably know everything about these things. I think even if they studied one, they still don't know it because they don't know what it does in the time it's in the woods. I mean, if we had one on the table, they'd still be, speculating, what's this migrational habits or whatever, unless they was able to track one or tag one and follow it that way. Maybe they can in the future. I don't know, but I didn't know they even got on all fours. And after I had that experience, one of the first things I done when I got home from the hunt and I told my family about it. And of course, they were, just didn't know what to say, but I got on, and Googled it. I was like, well, let's just see. And sure enough, reports in Kentucky, there was just numerous people had spotted these things crawling on all fours. I didn't even know that they did that. I thought, okay, it's a Sasquatch. They walk around like we do, but nope. And that's what, the whole thing that about that experience that was really just overwhelming was it approached me doing something I didn't know it could do. I never thought about it doing. And then I see it in its second way it moves around, and it doesn't drop back on all fours to walk away. So what's the mindset that they have between crawling and walking? Can they travel faster, or why they do that, I don't know. It was just strange. I mean, a deer, he stays on all fours all the time unless they fight, and then they can rear up and kick and stuff like that. But this creature has multiple ways of moving around. So I think a lot of times people's idea of one thing is shocked by another. And that's just another thing about this creature, is it is kind of unpredictable. And the fact that, you don't know, you just don't know what they're going to do and how they're going to react.
Yeah, my personal opinion, and again, it's just my opinion, I think they do it for stealth. And I think the other reason why they might do it, as a hunter, you're engaged with all your different senses, and being low to the ground like that, I wonder if it was kind of smelling and sensing where everyone was at, where they kind of left the four-wheeler. And then when it popped up and was looking at the four-wheeler, I almost wonder if they had that same feeling we get of being watched. Like it knew it was being watched and it was time to go. And I'm just guessing, of course. I wasn't there, and it's just my opinion.
Yeah, that's a good possibility. I know since that occurrence, it seems like, I'm more in tune with what's going on in the wood. It just sharpened my skills that much more, I guess, because I'm knowing that they're out there. A lot of times I would be just, in the woods and just happy go lucky. And I'm a lot more sharper now. And, and I'm listening out for signs for that and whatnot. Not that I'm totally scared, but just being a hunter. We're born with the God-given abilities he gives us, and then we go to school and they teach us things. And then by the time we get out of school, we're filled with a lot of books and knowledge that, with half truths. And then our real true life experiences is really what we grow on. And I think in that sense, learning just in that short window, it wanted me to know more about it. And that's what really, led into me studying it. And then my youngest son turned me on to your podcast, and I've just absolutely enjoyed it, because you don't get to hear it anywhere else. The hunters down here, one other short tidbit about that, but right after I had spotted that one of the chief guys in the club, the elders, this was one of the older elders of the club, was sitting there one day, following week after I had that sighting in 2015. And I was like, I'm just going to pop the question. And it was over in the afternoon. We were getting ready to peg in to go hunt that evening. I said, Terry, I got a question, and I know this is going to sound out in the middle. And I was just expecting him to go, I ain't them things. I said, Terry, have you ever seen a Bigfoot or anything that looked like a Bigfoot down here? And he shocked me. Wes, he turned and he looked at me and he said, well, I was back here on stand 13, and he said, I was sitting up there in the morning, and he said, up out of a bottom, he said, I guess you would call it a young one that looked what you're talking about. And it come up on out of the bottom up into it's like a little shooting lane of grass, and there was old big pine stumps down through there. And he said, it crawled up on one of those pine stumps and stood up. And I said, really? And he said, yep. And he said, and it's, kind of put his head back, kind of looked around, sniffed around, and then he said it turned and went right back. He said, but it did, when it come off that stump, it went back on all fours and went back down in the bottom. And I was like, well, I can't believe it, Terry. I thought for sure you was going to tell me I was crazy. And he said, no, that happened. So I know for sure I ain't the only one on that club. Now, other people haven't come out and said anything. I really hadn't asked a whole lot of questions, but I know I wasn't the only one that spotted one on that property.
Yeah, in a situation like this where it's a hunting club, I would be shocked if you're the only one that ever saw it. I almost wonder how many people in the hunting club have shot a deer and went to look for it and it vanished.
That's happened, Wes. No doubt about it. There's several deer over the, let's see, 5, and then I got out for 5, got back. For the 8 years I've been there, and probably some of the years while I was gone, I know there was several deer that was shot and fatally wounded, and we never found them. And I wonder sometimes, is that a dinner bell for these things? Or they know hunters are shooting deer, and are they hoping to find it before we do? But I shot one since I've been back in the club a couple years ago. I knocked this deer down, and I knew it was down. And then I had it was a buck, nice buck. And then I had a doe come out. I shot her, and she ran off and fell down and died. And so I climbed. I'll sit there for about another 30 minutes, getting close to dark. I walked down, found the first one, drug it out. And then I went on down where I knocked the other one down, and there was a puddle of blood and some blood going up the bank, but it was just drops, and the deer was gone. And I went back down there and spent a half a day the next day scouring that hillside and found nothing. So it wouldn't shock me at all, Wes. I mean, if I've never seen them eat a deer, but if they do, then, that's a possibility. Good possibility.
Prior to your sighting, there was a lot of weird things that went on. You were finding weird structures. You were hearing weird things in the woods. Did you kind of know what was going on? I mean, thinking back to that incident that was about 28 years earlier when you were in a tree stand, did that go through your mind, or were you just like, I don't know what is going on here, but we're just going to continue to hunt here, and that's the way it is? I mean, did you kind of know what was going on?
I really didn't know. Other than, like I said, the prior experiences, I figured it may be, but like I said, not seeing it along with it, you can only, say maybe or speculate that that's what that is, but it doesn't fit the place. I mean, when it's out of place, it's out of place. We have occasional black bear down here, and that's really rare. Mainly is, coyotes, white-tailed deer, turkeys, squirrels, foxes, raccoons, ducks, and geese. But that's about it. You just don't have any animal sounds outside of owls. You do, of course, and coyotes make noises, but the weird sounds that just don't fit. You just, in the back of your mind, you're saying, is this Sasquatch or is this Bigfoot, whatever, booger, whatever you want to call it? I think most people around here call them boogers in the South. They know more about what you talk about when you mention that than they do Bigfoot, especially the older people I talk to. But other than hearing other people's experiences and what they heard and say they hear sounds and they correlate it to it, that was just weird stuff, and it didn't fit. And that's why, like I said, when I finally saw this and it was like, okay, then maybe this is what making these sounds. I mean, with other experiences people have told, and they tie the two together because they've seen it and heard it. It kind of puts, 1 + 1 = 2.
Yeah, I would imagine, especially after you see it, there's always that moment of, oh, I wonder if that's what all that weird stuff was that I experienced before. Your grandmother, she talked about the boogers. Did you ever get a chance to talk with her as far as what she knew, or you ever have any long conversations with her about the boogers?
Well, she told me when she was a little girl, and the reason that she said that, because I was telling her that story about mine and what I thought it might be. And she says, when I was a little girl, they didn't have screen windows back in the days. They would open the windows at night, and when it was hot, that's just the way it was. And she said one night she heard something and she woke up and she looked through her bedroom window, and there was a hairy hand reaching in toward her nightstand. And she said that, she just froze. And I don't know, I can't remember all the details from that point on, but that's what she was telling us. So.
Yeah, that's creepy. That's really creepy. I wanted to ask you, after that experience you had in the 80s, which, again, I've heard that sort of encounter many, many, many times, and people react the same way you did, where you just sit there kind of still and hope it goes away. And then after actually seeing this creature, what do you think that they are? What's kind of your take on it?
I believe it's an animal that has characteristics that we humans have. That's my firm belief in it. I don't see if we found where, I guess you'd say that they were characterized different than that, then I would say, by things they left behind where it was more human-like. I think this just the appearance has human-like features. Like I said, I was saying a while ago, there's monkeys and gorillas and whatnot that have same features we do. They just don't look as human-like, but that doesn't make them a human. But, same difference with this. I feel like it's an animal, a wild animal at that. And they got to be the ninjas of the forest, the extreme hunters of the land. I mean, to hunt with their bare hands. They don't use weapons that I've never seen. Like I said, I only seen one, and I've never seen anything or anybody contribute to say other than maybe rocks. They use their hands. So, with that thing and to be able to slip up on prey, it got to be an animal. If they are half and half or something that goes back into the past, then, wow. That's all I can say to that is wow. So I would lean toward the animal side.
Yeah, I respect your thoughts on it. And you still hunt this property.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm not afraid to go. Like I said, if something's going to take me out, it's going to take me out. I'm carrying with 300 Win Mag. Some people say it's overkill. I said, yeah, but I don't track deer very far when I do get them. But, I got that in a 9mm during gun season. And like I said, I just go. It's a passion. It's like some people have a desire to go deep sea fishing or hiking or whatever, but hunting is my deal. And there's one other thing I wanted to tell you about, Wes. It's not Sasquatch related, but I've heard some of your shows back. I'm still listening to. I think I'm in the 400s trying to catch up because my son turned it on. You'd already been going quite a few years. But I was down at my brother-in-law's, which is probably 15 minutes away from the hunting club. And me and my son were back in there bow hunting one evening, and I went to check a trail camera right at dark. And from the bottom to our right, my son had just climbed out. We call it the fern stand, and I have a stand in there for bow hunting. And it's 48 acres of private land that ties into a bunch of other private land. And my brother-in-law, that was his bow hunt back there when we want to. And because I was out of the club and helping my son, get started into college, we would just go there instead of being at the club because I wasn't a member. And one evening we were back there, like I said, and I went down and he had climbed out of the stand and started up toward the road. And I said, hey, son, I'm going to go down here and check the trail camera card. So he stopped at the foot of the hill instead of going back off in the bottom. And I went down close to where the fern stand is and found the trail camera. And I retrieved the card out of it and I closed the door on it. And when I closed the door on it and went to stand up, this light, a ball light, size of a basketball, that was not really lit up like you would say a strong beam of light. It was a dull blue color, but it was a light dull blue. And it had like a little bit of white around the maybe outer edge of it. And as it shined coming up out of the bottom, it shined at like a 45-degree angle from left to right. But behind it, it was not illuminating any light. And the light was enough to shine and see trees, and you could see what it was shining up, but it wasn't not like a blinding light. And at moments, that blue would turn almost to a dull, maybe deep orange color, amber color, I guess. And then it would come and go back into the blue color. And this thing was controlled. It was not some gas bubble floating through, Wes. This thing was controlled. And while I was standing at the trail camera, my son said, because I turned and looked up at him and I'm like, are you seeing this? He goes, yeah. He said, when I said that and was turning back toward him, he said, it came up over my head. I don't know. I said, well, how high? He said, probably about 20 feet over your head. And when I had turned back around, it was coming back down. So I didn't see all the movement it made, but while it was over my head, I was looking his direction. But as I turned back around, it was coming back down from the upper position above me, and it was shining up to the woods to the left, which goes across a creek and goes on to some other private property. And it was lighting up the woods, Wes, as it went up the hill. It was, like I said, a 45 from dead center where it was facing. It would be like 45 to the left, 45 to the right. Anything behind it was completely dark. Strangest thing I ever saw in my life. And this thing was maneuvering through the trees. I mean, it would go to the left, avoid this tree, and then it would go back straight, and it would go up this way a little bit. I have no idea what it was. But like I said, my son can vouch for that when he saw it with me. Strangest thing ever.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing it. The lights are weird. I'm with you. They're weird. I don't know what they are. And when you say controlled, I get it. They don't just aimlessly float like they're nothing. It's almost like there's a weird intelligence behind it. And this didn't happen in the same place where you had your sighting?
No, my son said he's had rocks thrown at him down there bow hunting before, but then bushes shaking, but he never saw anything. I've never had any experience there at all other than seeing deer in that light. Like I said, and I came over there to where he was at just to retrieve the trail camera pictures, and that happened. And like I said, it was right at dark. And he told me even when we were leaving, he said, Daddy, I heard some weird stuff down in there tonight. He said, I just couldn't put my finger on it. He said, it wasn't normal. And I said, well, that ain't normal either. You know, we talked about it several times on the ride home. We live about 30 minutes from there. And like I said, it's about 45, 50 minutes to the club. So where my brother-in-law lives, he's in the club with us. It's only about 15 minutes from there to where I had my sighting of the booger or Sasquatch, Bigfoot. There's 100 names for him. Indians named him, every tribe. So I know with that going on, I always had an inkling. I said, with every story, there's a bit of truth. And too many people from the globe around with all the different names have seen the same thing, look at the same. They look similar, but are they exact same? I don't believe so. I've seen so many variations, heard so many people tell variations, and the variations are the same depending on how many people you talk to or listen to. Some of the people seen the same variation in the same area. So that tells me there's multiples, but he has had experiences down there in Due West.
Yeah, I really wish I knew what the lights were. I've only seen them twice, and on the second occasion, I actually thought it was someone with a flashlight that was walking. It was kind of that motion. But the other one I saw, it sounds very similar to what you saw, and it is a kind of a dull light. I wouldn't really say either one of them was a terrifying experience. It was just weird and just kind of confusing, but not terrifying.
Yeah, it didn't put me in a position where my heart was about to beat out of my chest with the one walking up in the dark and breathing, if that's what it was. Like I said, I'm speculating because I didn't see it. But that really put me into overdrive. The daylight sighting, it put more of, like I said, just blew my mind. And then seeing that light I was just like, wow. You know, we think we know what's going on in this world, and we don't have a clue. I mean, they ain't none of that no history books they taught us, and they ain't none of that nobody talking about on the news. You know, you're crazy if you see something like that. I know I'm not. There's most people, they live their daily lives. They drive up and down the highway. They go same places to eat. They go to the same place to work. They go to the same places to party. They never get out in the outdoors. And those of us that enjoy that, we have so much more to see, so much more to do. And we are experiencing a heck of a lot more than most people realize. And that's probably part of the drive that makes me like to go out and hunt. It's always a new experience. And any time out there is better than a good day at work. I tell you, a bad day in the woods is better than a good day at work. So,
yeah, without a doubt. And I really appreciate you taking the time to come on and share it. You'll have to let me know if anything else happens on that property. And I know, you know, that you go back to hunt and everything. Be careful, will you?
Yeah, I sure will, Wes. I appreciate you letting me share. Like I said, I enjoy the show. Trying to catch up, but it's a good out for those that your life's been changed by having an experience. You can't get closure, or at least I guess that feeling, like I said, unless you see another one in the woods, it's not going to give you any more insight. So you have to listen to other people's experiences to kind of build on what you've got and what you experienced, because it's one of those things. Can't put it away, so therefore you got to kind of feed it. I guess is the best way I could put it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And definitely keep me updated. And I